Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's now 9:30 and time for me to open this hearing session on Matter 12, Community Infrastructure. For those of you who haven't met us yet, I'm Caroline Malloy, and this is Dr. Rachel Bust, and we're the inspectors jointly appointed to hold the examination of the Lewisham local plan. Just before we begin, can everyone hear me okay at the back there? I'm going to try and lean into the mic because I noticed on the recordings I was very brave and just dipped in briefly to the recordings, and my voice seems to drop out, so I'm going to try and just lean into the mic so that the recordings and the live streaming picks it up. But do remind me if my voice is dropping, so I think once I get into discussion, it's quite hard to keep it elevated. Just a reminder for everyone to make sure that their phones and laptops, etc., are switched to silent while the hearing is in session. In terms of the use of microphones, as I've alluded to there, you have to really lean into the microphones for it to pick up your voice, particularly if you're quite softly spoken. Also, just a reminder to switch off your microphone when you're not speaking, because otherwise the live streaming sort of struggles to pick up the voice. Just a reminder that the sessions are being live streamed. Does anyone have an objection to that? No. Yes. There's a blue button on the panel in front of you with a hand and a head with a sort of a voice.
Hello?
That's fantastic, thank you. So yes, if you just remember to switch it off when you're not talking, that'd be really helpful, thank you. In terms of housekeeping, are there any particular things we need to be aware of this morning in terms of fire alarms or anything like that?
There's no planned testing of the fire alarm, so if the fire alarm goes off, it is a genuine fire alarm. The fire exits are clearly signposted, either entrance or exit there, and then our rendezvous point is on the Broadway next to the Costa Coffee, just outside this building. Hopefully everyone's aware of where that is. Toilet facilities are out the door and to the left-hand side.
Thank you. And for those of you who haven't taken part in the hearings up to now, the hearing session will take the form of a structured discussion, which we shall lead based on the agendas and the matters, issues and questions. Does everyone have sight of the agenda for today? We're going to be covering Matter 12, Community Infrastructure, and then we'll have a break before we go into Matter 13, Green Infrastructure. I will try and bring people in at the relevant point, but if you do wish to make a point, just put your nameplate up on Edge, and I'll try and bring you in as soon as possible. I would just like to remind everyone taking part that you should have provided all of your evidence in your original submissions. And it's not an opportunity to introduce new evidence. So please, please ensure that any points that you make relate back to your original representations. I'll just give a few moments for everyone to get settled. And also, please respect each other during the hearing sessions and allow people to speak and finish making their points. Questions should come through us rather than directly to other participants. It just helps to keep a better structure to the hearing sessions. So does anyone have any questions at this stage before we get started in terms of procedure? Yes. We are dealing with matter 12 first. And then, so we have some discussion on community infrastructure policies, and then we'll be moving on to matter 13. We'll probably have a short break before we do that. So yes, if you don't mind being patient till we get to matter 13. Could I just ask everyone to turn their nameplates around, just if you could just twist them to the front a little bit, just to help us see who everybody is. That's brilliant. Thank you. Just to check with the council whether there are any outstanding action points from previous sessions. I think you mentioned another modification or another draft of a modification. I may have picked that up incorrectly. Looking for
My apologies, Inspector Malloy. Unlike yesterday, the council have not published any further modifications to modifications. Just by way of an update, we are finalising. Well, obviously, we're still in week 2, but we are working on the full list of actions and modifications that have arisen through the course of the hearing sessions. As I just informed David, we're slowly edging up to 100 actions and modifications in total. Those will be with you as soon as we have checked and signed them off at our end. But hopefully you're comforted that we're working on those.
That's fine, thank you. I just wanted to double check. I am conscious, obviously, you're in hearing sessions, so in terms of undertaking the action points, I appreciate the time constraint on doing that. That's fine if there aren't any outstanding actions from previous sessions. Yes.
So it's just a technical point. I spoke to the programme officer about a missing document, and he said it's too late, but I could ask yourselves. It's an important appeal decision. It was referred to in my original response, but
Before we get to that,
yeah.
I don't know whether your laptop and maybe your watch is interfering with the. You can take them up and switch them, can't you?
Yeah, dodgy mic. So yeah, it was just to see if I could speak to the programme. So my original response has reference to an appeal decision, which is quite important. And he said that I'd need to seek your permission to see whether that could be submitted as an evidence document.
I mean, you would have heard in my opening that obviously all evidence should have been submitted to the examination. So really, it would be up to yourself to justify why that should be accepted by us late. If you could just set out the relevance of it and explain a little bit of, briefly how relevant it is to your case and why it's been submitted late, that would be helpful before we make a decision. Obviously, I have to ask the council whether they are happy to accept it as well. But if you could just give a little bit of background, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Do you want me to do that now or at the relevant?
I haven't actually got around to introductions yet, so you possibly jumped the gun a little bit.
Okay.
Do you want to hold that thought, and
Yeah,
we'll do
sure.
introductions and then come back to that point. But as I did say, my introduction, it's not the hearings aren't an opportunity to submit late evidence, so just bear that in mind.
No, I didn't want to submit late evidence. It's just that my response makes reference to it.
Just forgot to attach it to your
Well, it was the original response, so the council have a copy of it.
We'll come back to that. But before we do get started, can I ask people to introduce themselves, starting with the council, please?
Good morning, David Syme. I'm the Head of Strategic Planning at Lewisham.
Good morning. I'm Karol Jakubczyk. I'm the Planning Policy Manager here at Lewisham.
Good morning. I'm Keen Hassan and I'm a senior policy planner here at Lewisham.
Hello, my name is Tim Shody. I'm from the Down and Dividend Society.
Can I just take your surname again, please?
OSHODI. OSHODI.
Yes.
Good morning, Inspector. I'm Anwar Ansari from AA Homes and Housing in relation to a site which is proposed to be designated as an MOL site in Courtroy Road, SE231PL. And I have two colleagues with me from the company to assist.
Sorry.
Sorry, could you repeat your name? I didn't catch that. Just lean into the mic, please.
Amir Ansari.
The planning assistant, Inspector. Be good.
Good morning, I'm Sadia Salim from AA Homes and Housing as well.
Repeat your surname, please.
Yeah, Miss Salim.
Good morning. My name is Ian Gidley. I'm the Director of Planning Consultancy, Land and Planning Consultants Limited, representing Investor Alliance Limited in respect of their land at Duncombe Hill.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the agenda. I think all participants are here for matter 13, not matter 12. So I think it's just ourselves and the council for matter 12. So on that basis, I think I'll deal with we'll deal with the issue of the appeal decision for matter 13. If that's okay with you. What I would say as well, and I know you're here for matter 13, but obviously this session is about the green infrastructure policies and the community infrastructure policies. We are having site-specific sessions later on in the hearing session, so so this isn't really the right forum to discuss site-specific issues. It's only really in relation to the community infrastructure and green infrastructure policies themselves. So just bear that in mind. We don't want to get into the detail of individual sites at this stage. So I'm just putting a marker down, just if you could bear that in mind in making when you make your representations on matter 13. Okay, now we have the formalities out of the way. I'd like to move on to the agenda and matter 12, community infrastructure policies. And just starting out with I have to say it probably isn't the soundness issue, but we have raised a question of the terminology, the chapter heading community infrastructure, just in terms of the compatibility with the London plan, which refer to social and community infrastructure. As I say, probably not a soundness issue, but it's, we just thought from a consistency point of view.
Yes, thank you. I've sort of considered this and considered it again and considered it again, and I think I don't have any real issue with making that amendment. And I think if the direction from the inspectors is that it would make it clearer, and again, I've gone backwards and forwards, so I've got no issue with changing that to social and community infrastructure to make it consistent with the London plan.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a view on that, but it's not. We're not going to be losing sleep over it, I don't think. Just as we're going through the policies, if I can ask the council as well, just to flag up if there are any modifications, that would be helpful. I think we just have the original or the sort of set of modifications submitted at the start of the examination hearing session. So, but just in case I forget, if you could just remind me, thank you.
So in terms of the modifications identified under PD 11, there are a number. My apologies, the numbering is out of sequence, but they are MO 215.
Sorry, can I just ask participants at the table not to talk whilst the hearing sessions and taking place, because it's a little bit distracting, and obviously we need to be able to hear what people are saying, and obviously we're being live streamed as well. So if you could keep any conversations for after the session's adjourned, thank you. Yes, sorry.
Thank you. That they are identified under PD 11 as MO 215, MO 52 through to 54, then picking up the higher numbering sequence, MO 216 to 217, MO 55, and then again MO 218 to 220. And they cover a mixture of proposed modifications to policy and supporting text.
Okay, thank you for that. And if pick them up as they're relevant to the discussion, that would be helpful. So just starting out, my first question, does policy provide sufficient certainty to developers and plan users as to the level and type of community infrastructure which may be needed as part of new developments? If the council could start off, please, that would be helpful.
So the council thinks that policy CI1 is sound and does provide sufficient certainty to developers. In terms of infrastructure need, there is always an ongoing assessment of infrastructure needs depending on population trends, growth, etc. What we make reference to in Part A is that we will work with developers and other interested parties to identify needs for community infrastructure. And the policy sets out in Part B the type of development that will be expected to make provision for infrastructure, and making reference to the IDP and any specific master plans that are in place at that time. The council points out that in terms of the evidence base that underpins the infrastructure needs, there are a number of documents that set out what is required, and that is then collated within our infrastructure delivery plan and set out in the tables. I know there's a separate session on the infrastructure delivery plan, so I won't go into too much detail. Where there is specific need for infrastructure to be located within site allocations, these are clearly marked or indicated in the site allocations. And an example of that would be, for example, Convoy's Wharf, where a provision of a primary school is indicated. On other schemes where it isn't quite as clear cut in terms of the provision on site, we would expect those major developments to come forward with an assessment of needs, and through negotiation with the council at the pre-application stage, we would be looking at whether or not local infrastructure, and by that I mean community facilities, etc., at a local level, were required on the site. And if they could not be delivered on site, then we'd be looking at off-site payments. And that would, again, just to be clear, we have got the community infrastructure levy which has been in place since 2015, which is helping to support the delivery of our infrastructure, and also through the use of Section 106 agreements as well, we deliver our community infrastructure. The other point I'd like to make is that in terms of the way in which the council as a London borough approaches responding to demand in terms of infrastructure is generally looking at our existing assets and trying to see where possible how we can make those more efficient and extend on those council assets. So an example of that would be Ashmead Primary School, for example, which recently had an extension built to the school to provide more primary school provision. Likewise, the One Public Estate developed by Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust is about how we can optimise their own assets by refurbishing, extending and redeveloping, providing redeveloped healthcare provision on sites that they currently own. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the need for specific infrastructure, large-scale infrastructure, to be delivered on key development sites not owned by the public estate is limited, and where that is the case, we've identified those through the site allocations.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of any sort of infrastructure might be included in the infrastructure delivery plan, that's probably clearer cut, isn't it? In terms of, developers can clearly see what they need to provide. But in terms of potential contributions to infrastructure which is not identified in the IDP, are you saying that's essentially dealt with on a case-by-case basis?
Yes, that's correct. That's done through the pre-application process, through development management process. Again, we'd be asking the developers to work with us to look at an assessment of needs, and then the contribution would we would work out on a local level what that contribution is. And just to be clear, we do have SAIL in place as well, which covers quite a lot of this as a mechanism to secure funding for community infrastructure.
In terms of Part B, is the plan sufficiently clear as to when community infrastructure would be required on site as opposed to making an off-site contribution?
Yeah, so to reiterate, where there is an on-site contribution to be made, particularly for larger scale infrastructure, i.e., the provision of a new leisure centre, the provision of a new school, those are clearly identified within the site allocations, and stroke or they are identified within master plan and frameworks that we have endorsed by the council, i.e. the Catford master plan. Elsewhere for smaller scale community infrastructure, and I'm thinking community spaces, etc. Again, that will be done on a site-by-site basis through negotiation with the developers and landowners at the time. That is the way in which we've been providing and developing our community infrastructure, particularly for those smaller scale facilities in the past, and seems to work well. And I think it's also fair to say that the development industry in London goes into those kind of negotiations with an understanding that that is a requirement from local authorities, and quite happy to have those discussions.
Because looking at Part D, which we'll come on to, that relates mainly, as I understand it, to where there's a loss of a community facility. And Part D is very clear, isn't it? In exceptional circumstances, that consideration would be given to payment in lieu contributions. That's very clear cut. Whereas I think in Part B, in relation to the offsite and sort of offsite contributions, is slightly less clear in terms of when those would be, the offsite contributions would be required in preference to on-site provision.
I think if there's a need for the council to reconsider that part and strengthen or clarify or provide greater clarity, then we can certainly take that away and look at that. I think we also touched upon yesterday the developer contribution SPD, which we have in place at the moment. It is adopted, but it is rather old, and the intention is to provide an update to that, as we mentioned yesterday. But certainly we could take that paragraph away and provide greater clarity if the inspectors feel that is required.
I appreciate it would depend on the type of community infrastructure as well. So say education contributions, clearly you wouldn't necessarily look towards on-site provision unless it was a very large development, which required a primary school or something like that. So I do appreciate that it depends on the type of community facility. So yeah, just from a developer's point of view, though, if you are looking at the plan, you're looking to buy a piece of land, would there be sufficient certainty in that policy as to what would be expected, to factor into those negotiations on the land value, etc.?
Yes, I think this will probably become more apparent when we go through the site allocations. Just to reiterate that a lot of our site allocations are covered by outline planning applications, particularly the larger strategic sites that would facilitate those larger scale infrastructure. Also, again, many of our site allocations also are covered by frameworks which are endorsed, which again set out that required community infrastructure. I think there is, and again, we can come on to this at a later date. There is probably a requirement for the future opportunity area if the plan goes forward in Bell Green. To consider a kind of future master plan for that area, to consider the community infrastructure that's required for those collection of sites. I think the council acknowledges that that needs to take place. As I said previously, in terms of developer interest in the timing of those sites, it's rather helpful that that's towards the end of the plan period, which gives us enough time effectively to do that. But once again, we can go through the IDP and the community infrastructure requirements, but just to reiterate that the general strategy for each of the infrastructure providers is to use their existing facilities and estate to provide uplift in capacity. So the NHS Trust is using that model. Our schools department are using that model, plus it has the extra provision at Convoys Wharf. So in terms of large scale infrastructure requirements over the plan period, and again, we can maybe pick this up in the IDP, at the moment, with the best evidence that we have, there isn't anything that is missing from the plan currently.
Okay, so in terms of site allocations, that the relevant policy flags up if there is a particular requirement, so that in terms of the larger sites, that would give the developers some certainty as to what's expected. So it's really more the smaller sites, isn't it, that come forward, the windfall sites, if you were looking at that policy, that you would lack that certainty and clarity, I think. And just looking at the wording in terms of on-site and off-site contributions, I think, you've offered to look at the wording. I think that would be helpful. But it states that off-site contributions could support the expansion of capacity of existing facilities. And its use of words like where appropriate, I think, lack clarity in terms of, well, what do you mean by that? And I think there's potential for the supporting text to just set out the circumstances in which you are likely to require on-site provision and the circumstance which you would require, where an off-site contribution may be more appropriate. And I think the other question I had in relation to the policies, in terms of flexibility, how has viability been taken into account in that policy? I think that's something that probably needs to be looked at as well, because it may be that if a site is not viable, that off-site contributions might be more appropriate. So I think it would just benefit from a little bit more clarity on those sort of finer details and nuances.
Yes, that's no problem at all. We can take that away and we'll note that as an action.
In relation to criterion C and little c, I've asked a question there. Is it justified to treat community facilities that may be part of the public estate differently to those facilities which may be run by other groups and organisations?
Yes. So this part of the policy is directly referencing the London plan, namely policy S1, developing London's social infrastructure. The exact text forgive me. It is policy S1, developing London's social infrastructure, part F. That says development proposals that would result in a loss of social infrastructure in an area or defined needs as identified in the borough's social infrastructure needs assessment required under Part A should only be permitted where, and the second bullet point is the loss is part of a wider public service transformation plan.
Getting to the London plan there.
It's page 216 for reference.
Okay, so the wording comes directly from the London plan. Okay. And in terms of modifications to that particular policy, could I just ask you to highlight those and explain the rationale for those, please?
Thank you, Inspector Malloy. There are several. Some are significant. Some just deal with typographical errors that were inherent in the submission version of the plan. But in order, modification MO215 relates to the policy wording itself. So policy CI1 Part A, and it relates specifically to the issues of meanwhile uses. So whilst the council maintains that the policy remains sound, it is happy to consider the introduction of additional text that addresses that. So under Part A, it inserts the sentence, meanwhile and temporary uses should not be assessed under this policy and are dealt with under policy DM5.
It's just for the avoidance of doubt, isn't it? It just helps to make it very clear. Yeah.
Moving swiftly on modification MO52, that is to correct a typographic error and delete 2 superfluous commas. And modification MO53 relates to supporting text paragraph 9.1, and that inserts the term cultural facilities in the list of community infrastructure that's contained within that supporting text paragraph.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those. That concludes my questions in relation to policy CI1. Moving on to high quality community infrastructure. It's a phrase that's crept up a few times in the examination. Could criterion A have unintended consequences? And I think, is that in relation to the right one? Yeah, in terms of if an existing community facility is not at present easily accessible by public transport, would proposals for its alteration, extension or reconfiguration be resisted under criterion A, B, which requires such proposals to be easily accessible by public transport? Is more in relation to the extension, etc., of existing facilities.
Yes, I think certainly the intention of the policy was not to do that. It really it was to do with new community infrastructure being located in easily accessible locations relating to London Plan Policy S1, which states new facilities should be easily accessible by public transport, cycling and walking, and should be encouraged in high streets and town centres. And it really responds and relates to the flexibility of new town centre uses and the encouragement to have that broad mix of use. But I think the council concedes that as the policy wording is currently written, that there could be it could be read in that way, and I think we may have to distinguish between new and existing facilities within the policy, just to draw that distinction and make it clear that we wouldn't refuse applications relating to existing facilities.
And I can't imagine there would be a situation where you would, but it's just, may as well get the wording right, I think, at this point. Just in relation to Part A, Criterion C, is Criterion C justified that community facilities should be designed to maximise the flexibility and adaptability of space to accommodate a range of community facilities? I mean, there may be circumstances where it is appropriate to have a single community facility. I just wondered how practical that would be.
Yes, the council has included this criterion in here because what we're seeing is a much more shared approach from our community infrastructure, and actually the operators themselves wanting that flexibility to reach out and also to accommodate more a range of uses. So, whether that is a sports hall which can accommodate community meetings, etc. Or a library, likewise accommodating community. So the council feels that it is quite important to at least have the consideration of that flexibility and adaptability of space to make sure that our community uses and the community infrastructure are viable over the longer term.
So it's more just reading into that about the design of the building itself that can be easily adapted to other uses rather than necessarily requiring there to be a range of community uses as part of the planning application.
Yes, that is correct. Yes. If that isn't clear within that, and it sounds like it isn't clear, then we can take that away and provide that clarity.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that concludes my points on that policy. Moving on to CI3, sports, recreation and play.
Sorry, we're just checking to see if there's any modifications to that policy.
Keep me right, thank you. I don't think there are there.
Without wishing to sound contrary, there is a modification, MO 54, to paragraph 9.10, but it is only to correct a typographic error.
That's fine, thank you. Keep me on my toes. So moving on now to sports, recreation and play. I think it would be helpful for the council just to set out the evidence base in relation to sports and recreation facilities and play and informal recreation. What is the evidence base? Where's that at? And for example, in relation to playing pitch strategy and sports and recreation facilities, are Sport England happy with the evidence base?
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the evidence base, the council has a playing pitch strategy, which is 2019 to 2024, which is EB 47. And it also has a physical activity and healthy lifestyle strategy, which also we are drawing upon. And the third bit of evidence base is the council's indoor built sports facility assessment. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. 2021 to 2033. In terms of other evidence base, we've also got the green infrastructure evidence base, which we will then touch upon in more detail in the next session, but includes the Lewisham open space assessment and the open space review. In terms of headlines from that. The basic headlines is that whilst in terms of playing pitches, Lewisham has a lot of playing pitches located within its green network. The concern is more around about the quality of that, and particular types of facilities in terms of mugas and also pitches which are floodlit, etc., and have artificial grass. So it's not about the quantum, it's more about the quality and the type of pitch, particularly the installation of, as I think it's called, 3G playing surfaces. So the council is addressing that through upgrading existing open spaces and pitches that it has, and has made significant investment recently, and continues to make significant investment in its parks, particularly relating to the parks and open space strategy that we have as well. That is through money collected through Section 106 contributions, again, off-site payments that that major development provides us with. In terms of other types of...
Just before you move on, I am conscious that somebody wants to come in. Just a reminder to make sure it relates to your original representations. To make sure if you do make a point that relates to your original representations, I don't think you're down to 10 matter 12. So just bear that in mind. But I will come back to you. I just had a question in terms of the playing pitch strategy, and how that has influenced the council's approach in terms of new development, which obviously new development will generate the need, you know, for it will intensify the use of those existing pitches. How's that evidence base influence the council's approach to developer contributions and the policy approach? Is the council securing contributions towards the improvement of existing pitches, clearly as opposed to new pitches?
Yes, that is correct. As you can appreciate, with an urban borough like Lewisham, land is a finite resource, and I think this is explained within the open space assessment, which identified the current. It should be said that in terms, Lewisham is a green borough. In terms of per capita, Lewisham has significant amounts of open space. Nevertheless, it's recognised that with population growth, there is going to be more intense pressure within that. But given our requirements for other types of uses, i.e. residential, employment, retail, town centres uses, etc., the decision is made to focus on improving our existing playing pitches and our existing open spaces, and then what we do is we seek financial contribution to that through the development management process from developers to improve our existing open space, including pitches.
I'm just wondering whether that is reflected in the policy. The policy title is Sports, Recreation and Play. There's part B relates to the protection of existing sports and recreation facilities. And then the remainder of the policy seems to focus on play and informal recreation. But I'm not sure the approach to securing contributions towards improving playing pitches or indeed contributions to other sports and recreation facilities is reflected in the policy. I'm happy to be put right on that point, but
Yes, I think the council, on reflection, I think there does need to be a modification there to, I think, Part B of the policy to make that explicit that we can, the exact wording, but to look at existing sports and recreational facilities should be retained and enhanced. Somewhere within there, it needs to effectively reflect our current position more accurately in terms of off-site contributions for existing facilities.
I think it's just being clear to the plan reader, whether that be a developer or member of the public, that that is the approach of the council. And I think that should be upfront in the plan policy. And it certainly wasn't clear to me that contributions would be sought to either playing pitch provision or, built facilities, which we can come on to if contributions are intended to be sought for improvements to existing built facilities. And I think just needs to provide that clarity to developers that this would be the approach, so that they can factor that into their, financial assessments, if you like. But also it would help to ensure planning applications coming in tick all the right boxes from that point of view. So I think that needs to be looked at as an action point. Okay, would you like to make your point?
Thank you. We submitted in terms of the Regulation 19 specific reference to these issues and how they related. So even though we've been putting green infrastructure within the area in which we responded, and it's in our report, the issues of community facilities being reduced and how we can balance that via the green space we included. So there's things that have been discussed now, which we feel we've specifically referred to several times around that. So I just feel that we should be able to contribute, given that we've already raised these issues specifically around the policies that we feel are inadequate. And the most important thing that's inadequate, we feel, is that there's the public sector equality duty of the local authority, and there's been no assessment in terms of the equality's impact of what they do, specifically in the Downham area where there's been high levels of social and racial strife for 30, 40 years. And specifically, those of us who live in the area have had racist attacks. The Home Secretary, for the first time, for the first ever time, had to impose a curfew on the area because of the bus drivers. So there's been no recognition of the equality's impact of some of these decisions. And we raise it in a Regulation 19 submission.
Okay, thank you. Would the council like to respond to that point?
I think the participant makes a valid point around the
Excuse me. Yeah, thank you.
around the deprivation to the south of the borough, which I think is recognised within the plan, and particularly the allocation of the regeneration area, which covers those particular wards. And I know the participant is campaigning and working hard to try to address some of these issues and using green infrastructure and community infrastructure within that area as a means to draw the community together, which I think we fully support. And I know that there has been some evidence and documentation that the participant has provided to the council, primarily related to the operational requirements of existing community and public spaces, which I know my colleagues across the council are taking a look at. I understand that there's been a significant delay, and I will follow it up. You know, we had a chat at the beginning of the session. I will follow that up and make sure that the relevant departments are responding in a timely manner. I guess just to say that the plan does have an equality impact assessment, and it has looked overall at the plan and the policies, but I don't want to in any way diminish what the participant has said and the points that he has raised, because they are valid. And you know, as a local authority, more wider than the planning service and more wider than this local plan, these things need to be addressed.
Thank you. Would you like to respond?
Please, can I respond? It's not just one organisation that's campaigned. We've worked in partnership with the doctors, with the health authorities, and so there's a national planning framework which says integrates the UN sustainability goals. None of that's been taken on board. The council itself has its own, as a priority, has a Blaschere report, which specifically identified health and race inequalities, and there's been no account of that into that. Today, we, along with the report which is funded by the health authorities and by the GPs, they specifically wanted to come to this to make this presentation, and they didn't come because they felt that if they challenged, then there would be a consequence for them. So we've gone out of our way to try and include the partnership, the viewpoint, but they then feel both the statutory partners, both the health and recently the schools who we've been working with in partnership for 10 years have been told in writing that they weren't to even attend a meeting to discuss the health impact of what we could do with our green spaces. And so there's an issue of people saying things, but the reality is health inequalities by Marmot are identified as a key issue around tackling poverty. It's integrated into both the national planning framework and the London plan, and yet when we've gone out, got our own housing planning experts, provided a report 2 years ago to local authority, we've had no response. And then we submitted the same thing into Regulation 19, and once again, there's nothing within these policies around what the equality impact are of these policies, or what the plan is. And surely that's what this is that how do you use land and how can we improve the health and well-being of this community, particularly the poorest communities, and particularly because the policies which the council will follow have worsened equalities according to their own stats.
Thank you. You're putting the case very eloquently. So thank you. Thank you for your contributions there. In terms of the policies before us, in terms of the community infrastructure policies, we'll be coming on to the green infrastructure policy shortly. Are there any particular changes that you've raised that you would like to see to the existing policies which are before us?
We asked for was a health inequality focused special planning document. So that the report we produced looked at community wealth building and health inequality and how you integrate that into that. So in terms of the community infrastructure, the special planning document would consider those factors, and for us, the plan is unsound because they don't specifically take that into account. So we know in our area that when the poor are feel excluded, or the policies that the local authority followed exclude the poor, and so for example, in terms of the one classic example is everyone says that Beckenham Place Park is wonderful. They spent £7 million regenerating that park. But in terms of the community, that park was acquired by the local authority to meet the needs of the Bellingham communities and the Downham communities. They are poor communities. the £7 million has been spent on facilities where they were told there was going to be free swimming, and it's £6.15 an hour. Poor families can't get that, so they've been excluded by those policies. There's an asset-based approach to the use of land, which has delivered health inequality. Health equity, and there's no strategy within that. The council's own community wealth building policy is completely separate and not integrated into their community, into these community levy or so on. And so that at the heart of that is what we believe is beyond the words is a disjoint between the aims of what the council says around community wealth building and race equality, what their corporate policies are, and what their actual practices, their implementation is within what they're proposing. And we know that what they're proposing will fail in terms of what their aims are, because the evidence is there that it's continually failed for 30 years. And more importantly, for Marmot, there's asset-based approaches which work and which have been working for 40 years, which they've not included. And we've had the discussions, and then when we have the discussions, there's no recording of those discussions. So you're just going around. Sorry.
I mean, in terms of the plan before us today and the sort of overarching strategic policies, and as we were discussing, to help provide developer contributions arising from new development to go back into and help to improve existing facilities, or where necessary provide new facilities. You mentioned a supplementary planning document or an additional document that would require these high-level policies for that supplementary planning document to hook into. So these are important from that point of view. And I'll ask the councillor to respond on that, because some of the issues have raised are slightly beyond our remit. But I think from our point of view, the importance of getting these policies right in terms of those overarching policies to secure developer contributions and help to make sure that existing facilities aren't lost to development, and to improving existing facilities, and where appropriate to provide new facilities. It's important to get these policies right, which is why we're here to discuss that today. But I will ask the council to respond to the particular points which are probably slightly out of our remit. And then I can come back to comment.
Yes, thank you. And, again, I think, the participant has spoken very eloquently on this. And I think that the local plan does recognise that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. But I think, as the inspector says, this document is a strategic document which covers planning matters. It does recognise the importance of our green infrastructure in tackling inequality and improving well-being. It does recognise the need to retain community and improve community facilities as part of that. And it does have a policy which identifies the area that the gentleman is talking about as an area of regeneration, which is in specific response to the need to improve particular aspects of that area, and in recognition of the deprivation within that area. I think in terms of the operational requirements and strategy for assets and for open space, I'm afraid that's beyond the remit of the kind of local plan, and dare I say beyond my remit as well. But it is, I've heard what you've said, and I will go away and discuss with my colleagues who you've sent the information into, and get back to you as soon as possible on those matters.
Would you like to respond?
My understanding is spatial use, land use is about the maximum use of land for where you have to balance the different interests. There's been no discussion about how the PSD, the obligations are affected by the strategy which the council are proposing. It seems like there's a passive thing that if you do something nice, we're going to improve people's health. That's not what the whole health inequalities approach suggests. It says you have to take account specifically of the impact on the communities. We know the most excluded communities aren't going to be benefiting from the market approach which the council will. Gentrification in our area leads to racism. It leads to, and this is not my individual viewpoint. This is what the Blaschere has said. This is what the history of racist attacks in Downham says, and it's ongoing. The fact that the council do not even consider monitoring the social capital of the area, which is what they're supposed to be supporting, is a failure in terms of this policy. Because if we don't measure what the impact on inequalities are, then you just don't know what it is. But the legislation specifically asks you. It states that when you spend public money, you're supposed to take account of the impact on inequalities. And your strategies don't do that. Or more importantly, your own evidence says that the inequality is worsening via not taking account of these strategies. And therefore, we're saying to you is that you need to have a specific, in terms of your planning guidance, you need to have a specific regard to the health inequalities and race inequalities of the impact of your policies. And the way in which you can achieve that within the plan is to have a health inequality SPD. One that's specifically focused around those health inequalities, because Marmot and all the evidence points to that's how you deal with these issues. So we're not saying we have a solution. What we're saying is there's a process via the planning process where you can integrate these into your thinking, and that doesn't happen. And the reason why it doesn't happen because the public health aren't even involved in the decisions when they come into this, and they should be. And that's one of the key things which you should be discussing. Sorry, I've been there.
And just picking up on a few points there. Obviously, the integrated assessment included an equalities impact assessment, but also we have the monitoring framework, which we'll come on to in a separate session. I mean, how would the plan propose to monitor the potential impacts on communities, and in particular the type of issues being raised today? And, does that flow through from the high level equalities impact assessment through the policies and through the monitoring to see whether the policies are having a positive effect?
If obviously we have the equality impact assessment, which underpins the plan, albeit the council acknowledges its limitations is at a strategic level and is looking at this specific plan and the policies within this plan. What it doesn't look at is issues of operational issues, asset management, that type of thing. It simply looks at matters covered by planning. However, obviously we do regularly monitor multiple indices of deprivation, and each decision that the council makes at Mayor and Cabinet, there is an assessment of equalities which accompany Mayor and Cabinet decisions for across the board, including planning matters and use of Section 106. We are working with Public Health. We're working with Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust. We are supporting their approach of the one public estate to provide improved healthcare facilities. We do work with our communities and parks team in terms of trying to improve the green infrastructure and community infrastructure. The parks and communities team are monitoring the quality of those parks. I can't speak for the communities and parks teams in terms of whether they are monitoring you know, the impacts of equalities on those types of improvements. Again, I would argue that that strays beyond the planning process and this local plan process. Again, you know, I fully accept and appreciate the participants' view. I guess what I'm saying is that the local plan provides the high level policies which should then help in terms of those addressing some of those concerns that the participant has at that local level. But it goes beyond this local plan in terms of addressing those issues and requirements.
And what did the equalities impact assessment say specifically in relation to the community infrastructure and sort of green infrastructure policies in terms of the outcomes of that? And I think that there is a role in monitoring, having undertaken an equalities impact assessment. I think there is a role in monitoring to ensure that the anticipated outcomes in the equalities impact assessment are happening, you know, on the ground. So I think there is a role in monitoring. And it something we can come on to in terms of the monitoring session, in terms of looking at whether the indicators would capture the sorts of issues being raised, recognising, you know, the limitations of being a strategic plan.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and again, maybe looking at this in the monitoring session, I can certainly, I don't have the information to hand in the IIA, but I can certainly come back to the inspectors and provide that information. But we can, as I said, provide that information, and then obviously we do have the monitoring session. But I do want to stress that, you know, the local plan is a high-level planning document, so matters of you know, operational needs and control of assets is sort of beyond the scope of this plan.
It is, but I think ensuring that the policies themselves, you know, are achieving the outcomes that are the objectives and outcomes equally for sort of all parts of community. I think that is important, and that they're worded in such a way that you know, achieve those outcomes equally.
Indeed, yeah.
I mean, in terms of the wording of the policies, obviously the policies are there to protect existing open space and sports and recreational community facilities, to secure new facilities on the back of new development. In terms of the wording of the policy, how do you raise any particular concerns or issues, for example, that would help to improve your?
Yeah, just follow the council's own community wealth building policy, which is to maximise the community wealth building and health equality impact of the green spaces.
Sorry, which policy?
Sorry, of the community facilities and sorry, I'm thinking of matter 13, but in terms of 12 is to maximise the community wealth building and health impact of those spaces, of those facilities.
Policy CI1.
All I know is that they've adopted community wealth building policies and so on, but they don't seem to be then taken into from the guidance we've got is that they protect the green space, but they do not suggest how the green elsewhere the green space can enhance and maximise the community wealth building impact and specifically the public health impact of the green spaces. And my understanding is that's what both the London plan and the national planning framework require once it's because they've integrated the UN sustainability goals into the national planning framework.
I don't think your representation suggested a particular form of wording, did they, to the, or?
The report that we produced specifically said we're looking at the maximisation of the community well health, the public health impact of these assets.
I think it's really recognising the importance of open space, and we're coming on to green infrastructure later, in terms of the potential public impact on health and well-being, isn't it? It's that recognition, I think, that MEBs could be incorporated, and that would reflect national policy as well in the NPPF, which recognises the importance of open space for for well-being, etc. I'm just looking at the NPPF at the moment. If you just bear with me.
And can we just add in terms of the in terms of monitoring, there's a thing about community evaluation and whether that could be integrated into the process, because most of these communities feel that they're not being involved in the process. They don't know how to participate. I had 20 community organisations that are consulted here. None of them feel able to participate in this process. And so that's not anybody else's fault, but that's that's what the trust was set up to do, but that's a barrier for them. And so looking at the ways in which have been achieved to allow the community to evaluate the impact of these policies is a key thing, because a healthy community is one in which it feels it has a say and that it can see that its voice is heard. And part of the reason why in our area there's such high levels of anti-racist, anti-social behaviour is because the established communities feel they've got no say, and then they blame the new immigrants, and that's just the reality of where we live, and so on. Which and so that thing about communities having been able to evaluate the impact, or that the policy of allowing to evaluate the impact of the policies is also what I think community wealth building, which the council says is their priority, is about as well.
I have to say you're a very strong advocate for the communities and speak very, very eloquently on the subject. Yeah, I'm just looking at Section 8 of the NPPF is all about promoting healthy and safe communities, and recognising the importance of open space and recreation for communities. So I wonder if there's the council could have a think about the wording in the NPPF and look at how that could be incorporated into the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. I would say that there is an awful lot of reference within the local plan to the well-being of our communities and the use of open space as a mechanism to improve deprivation within the area, well-being, inclusive communities, etc. But if that isn't clear enough, then we can certainly take a look at the wording, particularly in the supporting text.
I think if the council, I'm very reluctant to give you more homework, as it were, because I appreciate how much you have to do, but maybe bring that together if it is in the plan, to bring it together, and it may be a case of giving it greater emphasis. Putting it more upfront, I think, in the plan, recognising the important points that have been raised, and it is a strategic plan, but I completely hear what you're saying, and I think there could be some wording changes which would give greater emphasis to the points raised in terms of equalities. So yeah, I think some of the matters raised are out with the examination, but I think there could be some scope to give a higher profile to those issues.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I'm just making sure my colleague has a note of that action. I wonder if I may, could I take 1 minute? Is that okay? Just comfort
Of
break,
course,
yeah.
yes, we can have a short break. Yeah, it might have been worth having a formal adjournment. I wasn't sure how long you were going to be, because the other parties have now left. I don't really want to start they're here for matter 13, but just give them a few. It's okay. Just give them a few minutes. Yeah. I just had a few more points on this particular policy. So if you can just bear with me, and then I think a formal adjournment for 10, 20 minutes if it would be helpful. We've touched on the playing pit strategy. It would be helpful if the council could just say what the headline sort of outcomes of the, I would call it built facilities or indoor built facilities assessment were.
Yes, I can go through that. In terms of what the headlines were, the evidence base looked at swimming pools and essentially concluded that there is unmet need, but that unmet need is relatively low. Nevertheless, there was a need over the longer term to provide additional facilities and improved facilities. And that's going to be met by a new leisure facility within Surrey Canal Triangle, which is identified within the site allocation for the north of the borough, which is the more pressing need for swimming pools. But there's also a recognition that in the south of the borough, there has to be improvements to the Bridge Leisure Centre as well, and the re-provision of existing facilities to the south of the borough, which the council is currently working on a strategy for. That will be on council land, so is not identified within the local plan at the moment. As I said, that is a strategy that is being worked upon, but there is no pressing need at the moment for that additional facility to the south, but the additional facility to the north is identified.
So just thinking about the approach in the plan again, would the council look to developers to contribute to the improvement and the additional facilities?
Yes, that would be the case. In terms of the facility to the north of Surrey Canal Triangle, that is being provided by the development and factored into the viability of that development. To the south, the strategy would be to collect payments and probably the use of SIL as well to pay for that facility.
I think we picked up this point earlier, so I'm not going to go over it again. But in terms of the approach needing to be clearer in the plan, in terms of securing contributions to, to help improve sports, built facilities, if you like. I think you could probably wrap that up with the action point on doing the same for playing pitches.
Yes, absolutely. And then just to go on to other facilities. So in terms of sports halls, and again, I'm relating to the evidence base, the name escapes me now, but it's the the built leisure facilities study that the council has done. So in terms of sports hall, there's a recognition that there is a need to provide additional sports hall to within the plan periods. So again, there are a number of additional facilities which have been identified within site allocations, namely Surrey Canal Triangle and Convoys Wharf. There's also a strategy to increase community use within existing educational facilities outlined in the report. So it names 3, but I know that others are being explored, and those 3 include St Dunstan's, Deptford Green and Tide Mill, to provide the kind of shared community facilities as well. And then there is a third component, which is strategy to develop improved existing facilities within the south of the borough. And again, that will be on council-owned land in community in leisure facilities that is in council ownership.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. In terms of play and informal recreation, I think the policy CI3 sets out a much more structured approach as to how the council would, approach the sort of on-site and off-site provision for play facilities. So I didn't have any further questions on that, except for the title of Part C is play and informal recreation. Now, clearly, play facility was quite clear in terms of what that means. What does the council mean by informal recreation, and how would that be assessed?
There is no standard for recreational space. I guess this is the type of space which would be negotiated through the development management process and using professional judgment, but there is no standard by which to assess whether or not an application has provided sufficient recreational space. I've just my colleague has pointed out that there is no definition within the glossary either, so we may have to think about that modification.
I suppose, again, just thinking out loud, which I really shouldn't do, but I think in terms of informal recreation, is there an overlap with some of the open space type of provision and typologies? I'm thinking, showing my age, but thinking of the old sort of PPG 17 type typologies. Amenity green space is often thought of as not necessarily formal play space within a development, but green spaces by the roadside, that kind of thing, more informally used, dog walking, that type of thing. And it's just not clear to me where this informal recreation space would fall within those sort of older style typologies of open space, and whether it's best in here or in the open space policies and green infrastructure section. And you're saying about development proposers should provide informal recreation, but it's not clear. Well, what does that mean? There's no standard for it. How would developers know what's expected of them?
I think that's noted. I think you're absolutely spot on. That's the type of or the typology of open space that we were referring to here. We can take that away and have a look to see if it fits more neatly within the open space or green infrastructure section.
In terms of the evidence base, did the open space assessment, and sort of touching on my colleagues' area, but did the open space assessment look at those typologies and set standards for those typologies of that more in sort of amenity style green space?
It didn't set standards for those, no. I mean, we looked at the typology, and again, we'll come on to this in the kind of green infrastructure, but there's obviously the that amenity green space typology of the past that is a recognizable typology, but the open space assessment didn't specifically set a requirement. There is no requirement or standard in regional policy, i.e. the London plan, and generally it's done through a design-led process, and the amount of recreational space will depend on the type of development and the scale of site, etc., through that design-led process. So apologies, the short answer is no, it didn't set a kind of standard for that.
Just looking a bit further through the policy, Part E, criterion G, refers to site outdoor communal amenity and place spaces at the street level. So that's a slightly different terminology, and I think there's a little bit of confusion there between those terminologies, and maybe the communal amenity space or the definition is possibly more akin to the sort of thing you're thinking about. But I think there's definitely scope for clarification on that point.
I will take that away and look at it. Yes, and I think there is a crossover between those two. I think we do have a definition of communal amenity space within the plan, but yes, there is distinct overlap between the two. So we can take that away and provide greater clarity.
Okay, thank you. Just staying with Part E, criterion G, having heard previous discussions in terms of the need to increase densities to meet housing need, would criterion G be effective at securing development at appropriate densities, given the focus on providing, community and play spaces at street level and avoiding use of rooftops, mezzanines. I wondered, for example, is there there's a role for balconies, isn't there, to be played in higher density development. So it's just really is that pulling in a slightly different direction to the push for higher densities in the area?
Yes, the council is suggesting a modification to address that point. We can certainly pick that up now, or we can pick that up at the end of the.
Maybe worth picking up now, just so we can round the point off.
Yes, so referring to, let me just make certain that it's both of them. Yes, so referring to both modifications to policy CI3, the first, both in sequence, MO216 refers to the policy text at policy CI3 Part EG, and the modification would read, where possible, site play spaces at the street or ground floor level of development, and modification MO217 to paragraph 916 would amend by deleting the words that follow in the second sentence, play space, so delete and other outdoor community amenity space, so would then read play space should be integrated at the street or ground floor level. Insert new words where possible, as the siting of, insert new word play provision on rooftops and podiums may impede safe access and result in, delete lead to provision being cited where, so result in microclimate conditions that are not comfortable. Continuing, rooftop and, delete the word mezzanine, rooftop and podium play space will only be accessible where, delete there is, where they have a clear design rationale and the provision is of high quality. Deleting the words an and exceptional.
I think just to clarify the council's position here, I think we recognise that where possible, that play space and communal amenity space is most beneficial at ground floor level, but given the scale and densities that we see within Lewisham, quite often though that is unachievable, and therefore we're making that recommendation to provide that flexibility, albeit the starting point should be let's try to get it on the ground. If not, then provide us with a strong rationale and make sure that it's very high quality or high quality.
Thank you. So that provides a greater degree of flexibility, I think, the revised wording. Conscious of a representation in relation that relates back to flexibility, relation to criteria on D and this issue of on-site versus off-site provision. I think it's Landsec have raised the issue that it states off-site provision will only be acceptable in exceptional circumstances. And I think the rep is saying, well, is that, is that too far? Does that provide sufficient flexibility in terms of the off-site provision?
Apologies, I'm just checking the London plan because this policy effectively relates to the London plan, and so I'm just checking the exact wording. Apologies, if I may, can I take that away and I just want to double check the London plan to see if that wording is replicated in the London plan, if I may.
That would be helpful, thank you. I think the final point I had in relation to this policy, and it's picking up, I think, on a representation is how would the policy relate to proposals for older persons housing in terms of the provision of open space, and does it provide sufficient flexibility to deal with that? Particularly in relation to provision of children's play space, which I assume the council wouldn't be asking for in there.
Yes, no, we wouldn't be asking for play space. Obviously, we have other policies which relate to that type of specialist accommodation. I guess we could cross-reference. Carol, have you got anything to?
Yes, if I may very briefly come in, certainly from my memory, this relates specifically to a representation from a specialised residential accommodation provider that was made at Regulation 19 stage, in which they stated that their customers, who I believe can be aged as young as 55. I myself am 54. Have no need for open space because by their nature they are elderly people and have no use for open space. So I believe from memory their representation was explicit that there should be no requirement for their form of residential product to provide open space. Clearly the council disputes that. I think, as my colleagues and I have stated to the examination, the Lewisham the Lewisham local plan is founded on being inclusive, my apologies, inclusive and open to all. So the provision of open space provision from new development, the council believes is justified. Clearly, we would, the council would say that it is sufficiently the policy approach is sufficiently flexible to ensure that development proposals that either physically cannot accommodate the provision on site or proportionately don't need to accommodate as much provision on site to meet the needs of future residents are taken into account through the decision-taking process.
Thank you. Yes, I think we're all approaching a certain age. Yeah, I think the council would take a pragmatic view, wouldn't it, in terms of assessing, in terms of applying that policy to older persons housing. But I just wanted to give the council the opportunity to respond to that particular point that was raised. Just checking that covers my points. Just to take views, I've only got 2 policies to go, but we are kind of changing over, aren't we, for matter 13. So just given the time, I was going to suggest a comfort break, and it may be that we just have a short adjournment where we swap over to go on to matter 13, if that's acceptable to everyone. Can I suggest we return here at 11:40?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Just moving back through the agenda and on to policy CI4, nursery and childcare facilities. The childcare sufficiency assessment is dated from 2016. Is that sufficiently up to date to form a baseline evidence for the plan?
Within the council's response, it provided a kind of update to that. So there is an update to the evidence-based childcare sufficiency report published in spring 2023. There's also a further report being prepared, which will be published in autumn 2024 of this year.
Just given the timing of the update in relation to the submission of the plan, are there any sort of differences in terms of the need or requirements emerging from the 2023 study?
In terms of the 2023 study, in terms of requirements, what it did was it looked at all aspects of or providers of childcare facilities. It looked at a survey type approach, asking respondents, parents and providers what they felt of the current capacity and quality of childcare facilities across the borough. I mean, by and large, in terms of the respondents from the providers, I think the stat is 86% of those who responded said that they had vacancies, i.e. they had space and capacity to take more children. And in terms of parents, the majority of parents were happy with the childcare provision across the borough. There are some obvious concerns and issues raised around about in terms of providers about the cost, additional funding, etc., related to additional free hours and government policy. And then in terms of the public, there was issues relating to, again, the additional hours and the providers or accommodation close to their homes. Just to say that there is a broad distribution of childcare facilities across the borough, and also obviously we were talking about town centre uses and the types and nature of uses. Obviously the flexibility now in terms of accommodating appropriate uses within our town centres, including nurseries, if where appropriate, also helps provide additional facilities and flexibility for commercial operators to come into our town centres.
So in terms of any identified need, has the position changed significantly between 2016 and 2023 study, which would necessitate a change of approach, if you like, in the plan?
No, I don't think so. No, as I said, there appears to be current vacancies within our existing provision, which can cater for kind of short to medium term uplift in population. Obviously, we'll continue to monitor this through, and obviously the IDP is a flexible document which we can update on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. Just looking at Part B of the policy, Is Part B justified to resist residential floor space being turned into nursery and childcare facilities, and are the criteria sufficiently flexible to cater for all circumstances? And you sort of touched on the issue there in terms of use classes and the difficulty that presents. And I think a modification's proposed, is that right?
Inspectors, the only proposed modification for this policy relates to a typographical error. We're not seeking to modify Part B. I think in respect of the justification for Part B, the council's position is that new nursery provision, new nursery and daycare provision where it is demonstrably required should be directed as a main town centre use to those appropriate locations where which are by their nature accessible to the sort of supporting transport infrastructure networks that serve those uses. Certainly the development management experience here and elsewhere of residential accommodation coming forward as nursery provision can present unsustainable and inappropriate development within residential areas, creating unsustainable travel patterns, I think, more fundamentally, but equally perhaps impacting in a potentially harmful ways on surrounding residential amenity as well. So the council's approach to direct these main town centre uses towards main town centres is considered justified and appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Just looking at the wording of the first paragraph of Part B, I think it was a point raised in relation to another policy, but the use of resident floor space for day nurseries and childcare facilities will only be supported. Is that sufficiently positive? Do you feel that's appropriate?
We can certainly look at that and be more positive and will be supported as opposed to will only be supported.
Okay, thank you. I didn't have any further questions on that policy. So if we can move on to policy CI5 and burial space. If the council could just set out briefly what the evidence base is and the sort of key headlines arising from that.
Yes, in our response to MIQ 12.30, the Council acknowledges that the policy supporting text, paragraph 9.23, refers to the Greater London Authority report, which is dated from 2011, which concluded that Lewisham falls within the adequate category of capacity typologies. Now, clearly that is quite an aging document, so we have been liaising through this process with our burial team to understand the what the evidence is showing. Recent evidence for 2024, January to March, demonstrates that Lewisham's bereavement services has received a further 115 new burial spaces, requests for 115 new burial spaces. I think in conclusion, or in summary, there is a need to consider additional burial spaces within, or an alternative strategy within the borough. The council is undertaking at the moment an assessment of burial land capacity and is exploring the feasibility of reclaiming old public graves to accommodate that additional capacity.
So there wouldn't necessarily be any implications in terms of the requirement for additional land in order to meet that requirement?
That is correct, yes.
And we'd raised the issue whether criterion B also needed to consider the impact on the water environment, water quality as a whole, and not just flood risk. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe there is a proposed modification on that particular point. If you want to just explain the approach there.
There is certainly a proposed modification to include appropriate reference to water quality. That is set out under proposed modification MO219, and that relates to the policy wording itself. And that's at policy CI5 part B small c, and that under small c, that would now read identifies and appropriately responds to potential flood risk and water quality issues, including through the incorporation of mitigation measures and etc.
Thank you. I think that would address our concern on that point. And also we'd sort of raised the potential impact on archaeology as well, and that's being proposed to be addressed by way of modification as well, MO218, I believe.
That is correct, yes. And also through so modification to paragraph 9.26 of the supporting text, modification under MO220.
Thank you very much. Those modifications would address the matters we raised in relation to that policy. So thank you very much. That concludes matter 12 in terms of community infrastructure. Did you have a specific point to raise in relation to matter 12, and does it relate to your original representations?
Inspector, we do work on burial spaces as a community group elsewhere and across boroughs. And within the Muslim community, there are specific requirements for burial times and sharing of spaces which have not been catered by a lot of local authorities. We're working in another local authority. We have been working with Lewisham Mosque on this matter in Lewisham, and we would like to point out a lot of the Muslim burials are now being catered for by private sector and out of borough, particularly because the local authority is not able to cater for those specific needs. One of these that we've highlighted is that the transport policy needs to be take account of the fact that the green spaces and maybe woodland burials and burials in MOL and open spaces, which is allowable as a permitted development, should facilitate some amendment to the transport requirements of being near transport hubs. And we would recommend that the officers here take account of that, although we have not made representations on that matter in this forum, but I'd like to add that as one of the things that we are doing in other local authorities, particularly in Croydon. We are making representation on the consultation 19, and they have the politicians and the mayor has amended the transport requirements to say that it's not a necessary element, but that to make it a little bit more flexible, that may be needed to be in transport nodes, not as an essential requirement, because a lot of community-based burials, particularly within the Muslim community, they only attend at the burial, but they do not attend on a daily basis, and they're mostly with family members where there's transport available in terms of cars and so on. So I would recommend, we have an interest in Lewisham on that matter, although we did not make representations in this plan, but we are quite keen and interested in helping out.
Thank you for that. Just looking at the wording of the policy, I will allow the council to come back. The policy, I think, quite carefully is worded in relation to criterion part B, criterion little b, states development proposals involving provision of new burial space or related facilities must demonstrate that it is appropriately located and within reasonable proximity to the community it is intended to serve. And I think that that's probably quite carefully worded there, and hopefully, takes account of the point you raised there. But I'll allow the council to come back on that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, your observation is correct. We did carefully consider the wording of this policy to try to reflect the participants' well-made point.
Must be a greater degree of flexibility in there, isn't there, than so saying transport nodes, I think.
The problem is a lot of communities are burying out of borough because they're the only facilities available. For instance, in Croydon and other places, there's a private facility in Sidcup or Walthamstow that caters for that community. So because of not having worked closely with the policy team, they're not able to influence the smaller members that will allow for local burials where they can visit in more ease and so on. So I'm grateful if they've done that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I didn't have any further points in relation to policy CI5. I think we've covered the modifications. So that concludes matter 12. Thank you for your contributions. We will have a short break just to allow us to change over. So if we can return at 12:10, I shall adjourn until then. Thank you.
Welcome back. I think everyone is now back. Mr. Hall, is he around? Is he still around, or is he just outside? Right. So it's 12:10. So this is going to be the matter 13, which is the green infrastructure. So I'm Dr. Rachel Bust, and this is my colleague, Ms. Caroline Malloy. So before I go any further, are the microphones working for me? Can you still hear me clearly at the back? Yes, thank you. So as we've had a short break, if you happen to have turned your mobile phones on or any other devices, if you could switch them back to silent, please, I'd be grateful. So we'll be moving through an agenda which follows the matters, issues and questions previously circulated. So has everyone got sight of the agenda for matter 13? Yes. So does anybody have any questions at this stage about the session? Yes. Does anybody have any questions at this stage? And a hand has gone up. Yeah.
While we are out, thank you, Inspector. In this session, are we able to talk site specific on this matter 13 or only general?
Thank you. We've just got to remember to keep turning the microphones on and off. Yes, when we talk about site specific, my colleague said we've got site allocations, but in terms of this policy, I believe your representation is about a site and metropolitan open land, so it's in the context of this policy. So it's perhaps more relevant to have it in this session than a site allocation session. So I'm content for that. Mr. Gidley?
Sorry, just clarifying that it applies to myself as well.
Yes, it does. There are some representations about sites, aren't there, in relation to metropolitan open land. It's probably easier to cover those today rather than do it within the site allocations, because it is a specific point. I think Mr. Gidley, you also asked about an appeal decision.
Yes, I did. I mean, I submitted my regulation 19 representations in two ways. I think one was email and one was online. There wasn't any opportunity, I don't think, or I couldn't find any way to upload documents, but they might have been an email, but I can't remember. Unfortunately, I've missed the additional hearing statements because I wasn't notified about these sessions. So I'm a bit of a late entry, which means I missed the deadline. But I did make reference to an appeal decision in my representation, and I think it would be helpful to provide a copy.
I think just in terms of that appeal decision, it depends on how much of it you feel you need us to see. If it's a specific part of it, then perhaps you could just explain that to us, linking to your representation, rather than necessarily give us the full appeal decision.
Yeah, I'm happy either way. I have got the full copy with me. I can provide it electronically, but it was a specific paragraph that I think would be helpful.
So have you got access to that specific paragraph today that you could, right, well, you can talk us through it when it comes to an appropriate point, and we can note that. Thank you. Oh, there's one table. I'll come back to you. Downham Dividend Society, please.
All right, so I'm unsure where to raise this, whether it includes it. So within our regulation 19 submission, we included serious things, and just some clarification. We talked about overall an asset-based approach to the use of the green spaces. Now, I'm not quite sure whether that should just come within the green space because it includes both the economic impact of the land. It includes the fact that we're not talking about health as the local authority talks about health. We're following Marmot's recommendation, which we believe that the national policy framework deals with, which is around health inequalities and the causes of health inequalities. That's very different from a healthy park. So you don't just have a green space which people can walk in. There's a recognition of the structural barriers to people's health. So I wasn't quite sure whether we should be discussing this as a whole, because what we thought that was a fundamental issue for the overall plan and the council's responsibility, or whether we should just, so should I just wait to that specific part, or should that be a part at the beginning, because we think it's a fundamental approach to how you use land and the national planning framework and its approach.
Thank you. I think if you'll see from the agenda, I'd popped you down under the open space, so just as sort of a place marker, so you knew when you might come into the discussion. So, but obviously comments to be made throughout the session as related to your representations. So, I think AA Holmes again. Did you have a further point?
Following on from the previous speaker, we did upload our section 19 response, but for some reason it appears the photographic evidence and the larger diagrams, which are key to understanding our submission, did not arrive with the council. And I do have a spare copy, so if you're minded, I could pass that on to you at the time or now, so that you can understand what we are discussing.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to the council, because obviously we've had a reference to a bit of an appeal decision and also an offer of a clearer view, which was part of your submission, as I understand it. Does the council have a view on this before we can get into the agenda?
I mean, in terms of the Regulation 19 submissions and whether they were part of that, I'd have to go and check. I don't think the council has any concerns if the inspectors don't, about having additional information at this stage.
So just in terms of the aerial, I think it was an aerial photo, wasn't it? And you said that was part of your Regulation 19, but it's just it wasn't. Right, so it wasn't actually in the Regulation 19. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought what you submitted wasn't clear enough.
Sorry for interrupting. It referred to these ordnance surveys, and I checked with the officer who said she didn't receive them. That's what I was saying, Inspector. May add, so the statement is not complete without the photographic evidence.
Are the photos referred to in the statement? They are referred to.
Okay, I think I found where you're referring to them in your statement. So paragraph 2.2. Yes, thank you. Yes, I think have you got copies for enough copies for the council to see as well, and ourselves? Have you got yours electronically? Yes. So you could but you could use your electronic ones if you could give one to the council and one set to us. That would work. Thank you. Yes, please.
Could the council have a copy as well, please?
Right. So, oh, Mr. Hall, is that a Toblerone?
It is, and I'm not Transport for London, as you can see, so I put it round the other way. All I wanted to say was that in my representation at the relevant regulation stage, I drew the attention of various studies, and I wasn't sure the best place to raise it, so I'll just quickly say it now, then I won't have to repeat myself and and eat into the time. Just to say that the opportunity to extend the linear park, which was a planning gain previously in the Belgreen area and Catford, and they link wider opportunity development areas, but this is like a public gain that comes from a green space, metropolitan open land. It was to clarify, it was a plea, and the council have acknowledged this in various studies, but I'm not sure if it actually translates, this is my point here, into the local plan, the opportunity to extend the linear park onto the Belgreen site specifically. And also in the review of metropolitan open land, I did find some difficulties with some small pockets, things like the tennis courts and bowling green at the Livesey Hall. These have been green spaces for a long time, and it was just to make sure that this is fully reflected in the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I had got you down on the agenda, Mr. Hall, for under open space GR2, but if that covers your point, I wanted to just sort of deal with any kind of procedural opening type things and then move into the actual agenda. So
in relation to the procedures, as an observation, I'm not sure the best way that it would be dealt with. I'm in your hands, really. It was the de-designation from previous iterations of local planning, which would include going backwards to the UDP, of certain smaller pieces of open space that were designated as metropolitan open land. Has that been done, properly and transparently?
again, when we get to policy GR2, could we cover that in the context, please? Okay, I'd like to move on to the agenda, please. So this is policy GR1, and this is the green infrastructure and Lewisham's green grid policy. I think the council have got some modifications for GR1.
Yes, Inspector Bust, we have two modifications. They are identified under modification MO 56 and 57. I believe slightly out of sequence that the first of those relates to supporting text. and corrects a typographical error. The second of those is to the policy text itself, policy GR1, and adds the following sentence: development resulting in the loss of irreplaceable habitats such as ancient woodland or veteran trees will normally be refused unless there are demonstrable exceptional reasons and a suitable compensation strategy exists.
Thank you for that. So we'll move on to policy GR2, which is the open space, which is of most interest to participants, I think, today. Starting at the top. So linked to question 13.4 and also 13.14 of the MIQs, the matters, issues and questions. Policy GR2 focuses on the loss of open space, but it's not entirely clear how new open space would be secured as part of new development, where that need arises, and also where the open space assessment identifies there as a deficiency. So thinking about the flexibility and the efficiency of that policy, how developers know when it was being requested. It's a fairly sort of common thing in a development plan to have policies to set that out, and then you sort of get subsequent policies which set out standards or preferences for the on-site, off-site contributions. We noted that Sport England picked it up in sort of a sports playing field side. So in terms of consistency, like cross-referring to CI3 for the sports issue, I think possibly it needs to be internally consistent, taking a similar approach in GR2. Does the council want to have a comment on that, Mr. Simon?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think on reflection, I think it may be the same issue here. To be clear, the strategy in terms of open space has been informed by the evidence base documents, particularly the open space assessment of 2020, which looked at the existing open space within the borough, both qualitative and quantitative, and it concluded that in terms of maintaining the current standard of green provision, i.e. How many hectares per 1,000 head of population that we have, it's 2.5 hectares per 1,000 head of population, which again is a fairly high ratio in the context of London, I may add. But in terms of in line with projected growth, that would then require a further 50 hectares of green space to be provided by 2030. Now, clearly, given the urban nature of Lewisham and the finite resource of land, that isn't feasible. So the approach that we're taking is to use the existing open space and green network and improve that. And the open space assessment helpfully sets out, again, the qualitative results of those, which then fed into our open space strategy that the council updates on a regular basis, which identifies parks that require improvement, and particularly has an emphasis on parks that require improvement within areas of deficiency or close to areas of deficiency, and that's set out in the action plan of the open space strategy. So that is our approach to our kind of overarching approach. It is, I think it's fair to say that we won't be expecting site allocations to deliver significant parks and by that I mean district parks. However, we do think that strategic site allocations or larger site allocations have a role to play in providing local parks. And where those site allocations are covered by either an outline planning application or a master plan, we've been very clear in the site allocations that open space will be required in those development requirements. I think going back to your point, I think in terms of the policy, we may have been too focused on protecting open spaces instead of setting that clearly out in the same way as we had the discussion about community infrastructure. And therefore, I think, if I may, the council could take those comments away and look at that policy to provide that clarity.
Thank you for that. I think that would be a positive action. I'm going to bring in the Downham Dividend Society because I think your point may be related to that kind of strategic point.
Definitely, and also in terms of the questions which you asked, and that Sport England itself has changed its strategy to recognise that rather than the council's emphasis on health, it's health inequalities to around the use of public funding, and a recognition that actually health isn't enough to tackle the structural issues and structural barriers, and therefore I think it's an implication on the council to take this on board, specifically given that the council itself have recognised particularly race and health inequalities as a corporate strategy that it needs to adopt via, there's a report, the Blachier report, which we refer to in our submission, and that needs to be integrated into this space strategy because environmental racism has been accepted as a reality, and that there's no nice green space that everybody goes into. It's a contested space between different organisations, and that needs to be recognised specifically, and the strategies then to tackle that. And there are established strategies to tackle that, which comes back to the asset-based approach, which we've been arguing for.
Thank you for that. That's a point well made. If we can pick that up in the action to see what as part of your thinking about the appropriate strategy and reflecting on this particular policy.
Yes, we can certainly do that. I think in GR1, which provides an overarching policy in terms of our approach to green infrastructure and Lewisham's green grid, we do make reference in the explanatory text, paragraph 10.1 about